Every time you struggle to pay your bills, every time inflation rises faster than your income, every time a recession wipes out your savings, someone, somewhere, profits. But who are they? This isn't a story about a few billionaires or greedy corporations. This is about a hidden network, an interconnected system of financial institutions, central banks, and private entities that quietly earns more every time you lose. They don't need your consent. They don't even need your awareness. Because the system is designed to make sure that when you go broke, they get paid. This is the story of how that network was built, how it sustains itself, and why escaping it may be the hardest financial challenge humanity has ever faced. To understand how this system came to be, we have to travel back to the early 20th century. The world was emerging from war, chaos, and financial instability. Governments were broke, industries were collapsing, and people demanded safety, stability, control. And out of that chaos rose the central banks. Institutions created under the promise of protecting economies, stabilizing currencies, and preventing future crises. But buried in those promises was a hidden mechanism, a cycle of debt, interest, and control that would come to dominate the world's financial system for the next 100 years. The twist? The very systems built to prevent financial collapse would learn to profit from it instead. It began with the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, a turning point in global economics. For the first time, money could be created not just by governments, but by banks themselves. Through a system called fractional reserve banking, banks were allowed to lend out more money than they actually had. Every loan created new money, money backed not by gold but by debt. That meant every dollar in circulation came with a cost interest. And who receives that interest? It's the same financial network that created the money in the first place. The result was an invisible tax on every borrower, every business, and every nation. A system that guaranteed the creators of money would always win, no matter what happened to the rest of us. By the mid-20th century, this network had expanded far beyond national borders. After World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Global trade, oil, and commodities, all priced in dollars. That meant every country, from Europe to Asia, had to hold US dollars and interact with the American-led banking system. Then came 1971, the year President Nixon ended the gold standard. Money was no longer backed by gold. It was backed only by debt and trust. From that moment on, the network had no limits. Governments could borrow endlessly. Banks could lend infinitely. And every loan, every deficit, every bailout became another profit opportunity. When countries borrowed to build, the network profited. When they borrowed to bail out after a crash, the network profited again. The system didn't care if economies rose or fell because debt was always the product. But a machine that feeds on debt cannot stop growing. And every few decades, it consumes too much. The 2008 financial crisis was the perfect example. Banks lent recklessly, packaged toxic assets, and created massive financial bubbles. When it all collapsed, the system should have failed. But instead of punishment, there was a rescue. Trillions in bailout money were created out of thin air. And who received it first? The same banks that caused the collapse? Millions lost their homes. Millions lost their jobs. Yet stock markets rebounded faster than ever. It was the ultimate display of how the network works. Privatize the profits. Socialize the losses. When you lose, they win again. Since 2008, governments and central banks have printed more money than at any time in human history. But instead of fixing inequality, it made it worse. According to the IMF, global debt surpassed $315 trillion in 2024. That's more than 3 times the size of the world economy. For every dollar of growth, several dollars of new debt must be created. It's no longer about producing goods or innovation. It's about keeping the debt engine alive. And here's the cruel irony. When inflation rises, you pay more, but your wages lag behind. Meanwhile, those who own assets, stocks, real estate, debt instruments get richer. The network doesn't fear inflation or crises. They need them, because each one resets the game, wipes out the weak, and transfers more power to those at the top. Fast forward to today, the same institutions that created the 2008 collapse are now bigger than ever. Central banks control nearly 40% of global GDP through direct asset purchases and policy influence. In other words, the market isn't free, it's managed. Every stimulus check, every interest rate cut, every government loan, all flows through the same pipeline. And at the end of that pipeline sits the network that profits, quietly, predictably, relentlessly. Even as households drown in credit card debt and nations buckle under deficits, that network thrives because every crisis means more loans, more interest, more control. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a business model. So what does all this mean for you? It means the financial system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed. A system built not to create wealth for all, but to extract value from the many to sustain the few. But awareness is power. It's the first step to breaking free from a system of control is understanding how it works. Debt is the product. Money itself is created through borrowing, meaning the system needs you to stay indebted. Crises are profitable. Every financial collapse transfers more wealth to those who control the flow of money. Control comes through dependency. The more we rely on central institutions, the less freedom we truly have. So the next time you hear about a bailout, a stimulus, or easy credit, remember these aren't acts of generosity, they're mechanisms of control. Because in the hidden architecture of global finance, every time you go broke, someone else gets paid. If you found this video eye-opening, share it, because financial awareness is the first form of resistance. And subscribe for more deep dives into the truths about money, power, and the systems built to control them.